welcome. My name is Jennifer Maddox. I'm the coordinator of the Kentucky Great Writers Series at the Carnegie Center. And it's exciting that our first ever virtual Kentucky Great Writers reading is also our Poetry Powerhouse Edition. Now, normally we do this event in April during National Poetry Month, but because of the pandemic, of course, we postponed it. And so luckily we're doing that tonight with three fantastic poets. But first, before we have our poets, let me tell you just a little bit about the Carnegie Center. We are located in Lexington, Kentucky, and almost all the programs we do for writers are actually now online, just like this event is online. The Carnegie Center has writing workshops, writer mentoring, a manuscript service. The Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame is one of our events that may end up being virtual as well. And then we've got our Carnegie Center Author Academy and many, many more things. So check out the Carnegie Center's website for more information at carnegiecenterlex.org. And because we are doing things virtually, you don't have to live in Kentucky. You don't even have to be in this country in order to participate. And if you think I'm joking, we've actually had people from London and from other countries as well who've already joined us for some of our classes. So it's been really exciting to see this broadening. So the Carnegie Center has been very fortunate to have some sponsors who have been with us for many years, and those include the Wrightsville Cook Foundation, the Kentucky Arts Council, Lex Arts, and even though they aren't here providing coffee tonight, I want to do a really special thanks to Nate's Coffee that has been providing their wonderful brew for our attendees for several years. And then also we had just brought on Eppings on East Side as our sweet treat sponsor. And so I do want to say thanks to them as well, just because they had joined us for the whole series. We just don't get to enjoy those treats for the whole series. And then also special thanks to Joseph Beth Booksellers, who is our official bookseller for tonight's event. And mentioning tonight's event, at some point, you're going to be seeing a link in the chat window to buy books on Joseph Beth's website. Since they can't be here in person and you can't either, that's one way we can still support our local indie bookstore. Now, if you're not familiar with Kentucky Great Writers, I will just say that usually we have an open mic event. Obviously, we're not going to do that now, but what we will do is at the end of the night, we want to have a chance for our audience to be able to participate. So you won't be on camera, we won't hear your voice, but you have an opportunity to type in a question that I will read to one of our poets. And so there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen that if you just let it hover over that, that should bring it up. You can ask any question that you would like to ask one of the authors or all three of them. And at the end of the night, we're going to select some of those questions and I will be reading some of them. And I'm sorry if we don't get to them all. You won't be able to see your question or other people's questions, I believe, but I will see them. So just know that we will get to that after all three have read. I'm really excited too that our first event like this, Carnegie has this thing that we say, Carnegie from your couch. It's something we started doing when everything went virtual. So as you can see, I'm sitting on a couch, and joining us from her comfy chair in her own house is Savannah Sipple. Hi, Savannah.
Hello.
Thanks so much for being in our event this evening. Right before you get started with your reading, I just wanted to ask, where are you coming to us from today?
I'm coming to you from my living room. My wife and I just bought a house in Lexington. We've lived here for a while, but we just bought a house this summer in the middle of a pandemic.
But there are a lot of people doing that. It's stressful.
I'm coming to you from our new to us living room.
Well, I'm glad you got to enjoy that new house. At least if you have to be somewhere during a pandemic, a new house is always a nice thing to be in. So
that's true. That's true.
Okay. Well, I'm coming to everyone from Bourbon County, where I live. Let me tell you just a little bit about Savannah Sipple, and I'm going to be very brief because we really want to hear from her more than me. Savannah's debut poetry collection, WWJD and Other Poems, published by Sibling Rivalry Press in 2019. Is what she might be reading from us today, or she might be reading something completely new. That is an option we give all of our authors. She's a familiar face to many who knew her from her days co-owning the Briar Bookshop in downtown Lexington, and she's also a professor, an editor, and a writing mentor. Welcome, Savannah. I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Jen. I just want to real quickly say thank you to the Carnegie Center for hosting me. Thank you to Joseph Beth for handling the book sales for this event. So I am going to read from my debut poetry collection called WWJD and Other Poems. So just a couple things about the book itself. It is divided into 3 parts. The first part is mostly what I would call being in the closet. And the second part is more of coming out and being okay, figuring out how to accept that. And then the third part is being out and navigating that. But there's also this component of religion through the book. And in the third section, Jesus becomes a very active character in the book. It's also very much based in Appalachia and the language of Appalachia. And so I think that's all you really need to know. I'm going to read just a poem or two from each section. So I'll start with this poem called All I Know of Coal. This is what happens when you cut the world in two. It turns on you. We all die. Cancer, copper water, no money, meth, oxy, Percocets, loss. A job or love, too much or too little Jesus. Mountain blasting zones where we blow ourselves apart. This next poem has an epigraph. It also has a long title. It's called After Seeing a Topo Map of My Childhood Stomping Grounds Hanging in a Colleague's Home. And the epigraph says, cartographers solved the problem of representing the 3-dimensional land surface on a flat piece of paper by using contour lines. Thus, horizontal distances and vertical elevations can both be measured from a topographic map. And that's from the Idaho Museum of Natural History. Once, when I was a kid, to scare a bear, my father walked one side of the trail and fired a rifle. The bear ran down the other side. The mouth of the trail came out at the edge of the woods in front of the house. That low dip line was the home run fence I aimed for when we played baseball in the yard. The bases were trees and home plate was right in front of our playroom windows. If you rounded third, you always made it home because we get our asses beat over broken glass. That was our benchmark, the one thing we knew. He could beat us. I knew the difference between a rabbit burrow and a snake hole, but I was scared of both. Spent hours perched around the shaded incline between yard and woods. Knew both contained something that could kill me. Once I flipped a go-kart turning out of our drive too sharply. Once I drove a four-wheeler straight into a tree. I once pitched head over handlebars off my bike onto the gravel road, trying to outrace a loose dog. A vertical exaggeration. The neighbor who found me thought I'd been hit by a car. Mom sat me in the garden tub, poured 2 bottles of rubbing alcohol all over my wounds to stop the threat of infection. At basketball practice, I once refused to take a charge, and the guard stood shorter than me, nose to chest bone, said, "Do you know who you're messing with?" At home, bruises littered my ribs. At home, an agonic line split my arm after every time my father stood in my face and screamed, "Do you know who you're talking to?" 1 inch equals 10 miles. I was 15 and had a higher ACT score than the point guard, a senior. a line. I was top in my class. A line. All lines. Once I hit a line drive into my brother's chest. Twice his fist found my nose. A relief. Every time we hurt each other, we cried. The contours tightened. I wrecked my truck, flipped a golf cart, crashed my car, kept telling myself I was lucky. When I was little, I kept bronchitis. My father gave me vodka for the cough. My lungs on fire, my kidneys on fire. My house on fire, years later, felt like a line, elevated. One that would bleed me dry, scar me. One that would leave me marked. This next poem is short, and it's also from the second section. It's called Pork Belly. Imagine you clutch the carving knife, slice it under and against your own ribs. One cut for every time they call you fat. Take that meat, preserve it with salt to season your beans. Pinto, green. In your hands, a bucket. The fat sloshes, hot grease you collect in coffee cans, glass jars, your dreams dripping off your meat. This is poverty. You save every drop. Tell me, how many people you're trying to feed? This poem is called Thirst. I loved her from the first Sunday she wore that green dress to church. It was plain, cotton, forest green, and hid a hair above the pale back of her knees. The neckline came low enough for me to see something swelled underneath. I could see my hands sliding up her legs, my hands running up her sides, my hands slipping that thing right off. Quick, easy. I loved that dress and her breasts swelled underneath, the way it clutched her body tight, just enough to see her panty line. My fingers wanted under the panty line. That dress was hot, but what really got me was the way she wore it, free, unconcerned, her body happy with itself. The dress, only an afterthought. So the third section is really where Jesus sort of, he's a character. He's a wingman. And some of these poems are shorter, and this is also where the title of the book comes from. WWJD also, refers to what would Jesus do. So I have several poems that start with WWJD and then place us in a different kind of scenario. So I'm going to read a few of these from this third section. Jesus is my best girlfriend, my Dutch boy. I ask him, why me? Beg, can't I be normal in one way? It weighs him down, our hate, makes his shoulders sag, his back bend. He touches the slits on my arms where I try to bleed out the worst of me, slumps, bone tired, looks me in the eye and says, love, don't break the yoke. WWJD at the bar. Jesus would take one look at her, suck in air, breathe out, damn, she's cute. Why you standing here, sis? Go talk to her. Ask for her number. Jesus would scribble his own, crooked on a cocktail napkin. Jesus would slide it her way, give her a slow wink. Say, I want to get to know you, honey. Let me buy you a drink. Jesus and I are on a break. Meanwhile, a blonde walks in wearing royal blue leggings, and I'm in love with her. Her thighs, the way they slope out on the sides, fat, tugging muscle. There's a healthy curve there in the back that stretches up to an ass that will fill my hand, help me pull her close. Her leggings remind me of a woman I met at a workshop, the way her eyes explode when she's excited, the way her body flexes when she moves. And the last time I saw her, the weight she gained looked good, real good, and I should text her. But there's a bank teller who wears ties every day and always says hi, even if she's working the window while I'm at the counter. And I want to tell her I'd jump that tall counter if she'd say yes to coffee with me. But right now my coffee's gone cold. A youth pastor at the table next to me says you should be thinking about boys to a young woman. But I'm not. She's getting ministered to and looks awful cute in her Buddy Holly glasses and Chuck Taylors. I'd like to do this thing on purpose. Scoot my chair right over there. Let my hands show her all the things she could think about and feel. Things a hell of a lot more fun than boys. Meanwhile, Jesus, camped out across the table from me, looks up from his novel and latte, says, "Girl, you won't know until you try." And I'm going to finish with this poem that is about my wife. Jesus shouts, "Amen." I like the way boxer briefs feel, sleek, easy, under skinny jeans. Smooth, my love trails her fingers along the elastic edges, along the softest parts of me. She's never asked why I sometimes prefer this underwear, and when I shaved part of my head, she said I was hot. My love runs her tongue along my chest, up my back, the softest parts of me. She touches my body, and my body, the softest, craves her touch. Her thighs grip my thighs, her face burrows in my breast. She holds me, locks her arms and legs around me, holds me close, even when I cry. My body is a holler I've tried to escape time and again, but now, with this woman, I am home. Thank you.
Thanks, Savannah. We appreciated you reading some from WWJD and Other Poems. Next up, we have Ron Davis. Hi, Ron.
Hey, how you doing now?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
So I'm in Bourbon County right now. Where are you located right now?
I am in Lexington, Kentucky, in our home office right now,
Yeah.
drinking bourbon.
Drinking bourbon.
Yes.
Writers love their bourbon, especially in Kentucky. What bourbon
Yes.
are you drinking?
This is Blue A right now. So.
Oh. Well, I'm going to introduce you just real quick. From those of you all who have seen this face before, I think you know where you've seen it, among many places, but writers love bookstores. And so Ron co-owned Wild Fig Books and Coffee for many years. First, it was on Leestown Road, and that's where I first met Ron, even before
Yes.
it was his bookstore, and then later on Limestone. His collection, Deifying a Total Darkness, came out in early 2020. And what some of you all probably know, and maybe some of you don't, is he's also an award-winning visual artist, and he has designed book covers for authors, including his fiancée, Crystal Wilkinson. So welcome, Ron.
Thank you. Thank you. Up From Some Dirts is the creative name I write under and create art under. So if you're on Joseph Beth, thank you for having my book. If you go to Joseph Beth or anywhere, don't search for Ronald Davis. You will not find anything by him. And if you do, it's not me. But my collection is Deifying a Total Darkness. I'm going to read about 4 poems to give you some idea of what I write. Mostly my haunts, angry Black surrealism, for the most part. Some of his history. I wanted to be a history teacher. I wanted to teach theology. So I took the shortcut and became a poet. It seemed to where all those talents kind of merge into. The first poem, and I have to read quickly. My poems are kind of long. I'm going to read 4 of them. It's going to take up right up to 10 minutes. these long narrative poems. I hope you like. The first poem is Just Put Your Lips Together and Blow. Poetry found me in the solarium, sound asleep. It was years since I last poured honey in these wounds. I could never see nature softly as told as some newborn in need of swaddling and a room-tempered tea. Something like I'll recall saying, if the Arcadian is to be tampered with, then I'll steep it in tequila and deep fry that bitch in animal fat. That's all the strength I can muster for the idyllic. So yes, dear fidelity, the love in my heart for the outdoors is grossly varicose and cares not for the romance of greater nature. Forgive the insouciance, I suspect it's inherited. Perspective. Emmett Till was murdered on this date, August 28th, a cryptozoologist for people of color. And as from such, I came to neuter human nurture. Never once did I blame the river for his interment in deep waters. But every time I swim, I too steep. And now the mermaid within settles for the creeks of little depth and is secure enough to weep in shallow water's slender embrace, where only our allowances of fealty can whistle at the wind. Photographer catches the exact moment a volcano erupts for Freddie Gray in the city of Baltimore. It begins with tectonics and anticlines and continental drift, a seismic shift when the contents are heated. The mantle hoped for diaparism, where passions bulge and decompress, gradual but volatile, but slates of skin are plates pass and robust raw. We consider it a terrestrial antagonism, reducing 4 or so centuries of push and pull to a single day, the rebirth of the universe in the pant for air, the collapse of Gaia's own event horizon. Some would call such a spew spiritual, an infernal faith channeled through space and time, a systemic science that funnels Magna Carta like a broken trail or a ruptured spine into bright bewildering, a temporal sweat, the core of us coming to a head until the opposition gives and all erupts. The flaring of the supernal. Yes, we are taught to condemn the molten, to call it names and misappropriate its character. But oh, how there is such a crepuscular beauty within the body of the igneous, the bowels of heaven divinely flaring, celestially creeping to our very doorsteps. Yes, the earth, it heaves, inhales and sighs, and only wants to breathe. The lungs open, a fusillade of blood and life. But after all, what poet doesn't romanticize Vesuvius? And what if consecration has a black body? Would you still sacrifice your blue-eyed virgins, their blonde heads in the hands of black pluming gods? Would you salt the earth? Would you still pray for a bountiful harvest? Bus fare for a Valkyrie. Question: where are the brazen poems lashing apocryphal authorities with fire and countermeasures to police brutality? The lit fuse in physical flight as metaphor for swinging, breathing, driving, singing, ruses and muses. A sundressed child, black and tan, handcuffed to a carousel, quietly smiles face down at a colony of ants, dismantling cookies into a cosmos of crumbs. The armored cop above her takes a knee to her back, taking selfies with rip-roaring laughter, while a volley of spectators look on, YouTube's benign guerrilla loaf. I've known poems to vibrate like the glass plate of a CVS, but never go viral enough to checkmate white supremacy, or assemble an assembly of SWAT teams into final submission. There are no poems burning literal hell through a Kevlar vest, like snipers for a black mass and self-sentience. Never has a poem been written that kills its enemies, for I have tried and failed. Free verse like drone strikes in service of the disenfranchised. And even when writing of pink unicorns in utopian gardens of mint, my quivers are concussed. A schizophrenic sun foams over the earth, and the stars pull out their hair, screaming until hoarse into the night. An apoplectic moon hoards its fullness and never surrenders its wane to the sea. Our civil suppositions were written in the shadows of a lynching. This plague of democracy a puzzle, where Holocaust performs due diligence, monopolizing all conjectures on race. So how do I justify the progeny, my simple trove of poems? Huzzah, discordant verse is balm for the rope burns around your neck. This inheritance of long, jarring prose, overworked sonnets to a disemboweled lover, this recherche for revenge, a pate of Pegasus. Children abandoned by civility, please come forward and have your fill. Muses and ruses. How does the code-switching poet decry existential nihilism without jeopardizing the genius grants? Answer: from the skull of an anglerfish, echoled from audacious hunger, the head of a pink unicorn dangles like bait. In deifying a total darkness. There is an absence of light on the dark side of the moon that lacks mystery once it's been Googled. For one and all, it stands beauty after the browser opens. There is anxiety for the supremacists chopping at the bit to turn Mars into an ashtray, a meth lab, a dining hall, a slight debris made from material malnutrition. There's little entitlement for remaining dark, no praise song for the hurricane lamp full of well oil and the seldom used wick of coarse nappy hair. I feel an extemporaneous cancer closing in. I wonder if illness in its wildest dream will cite a romance in our destruction. Will malignancy beatbox in couplets? Archaic cannibalism is the most honest form of commerce. They fed us metaphors when hunger burned ugly within. We gorged on unlimited data to placate the starvation. The expensive brooch made of mud brick and cinder block and placed atop a pedestal for 10 cents a touch. The whip's lash with its gift of wealth adding indecipherable glyph to a human ledger. Each layer of skin a table of contents. Across poor Gordon's back, an abacus of abuse. A blackness denied the use of liberty as a wallet for words. Marchin, the steadfast Templar, agonized his ownership of stolen goods, a variety of freedom papers and property deeds, a grand theft notarized, until he resurmised his fate's irreproachable creed, easing him into the most comfortable slumber. The moral white patriarchy is greater than a sleep number. Addiction to the pitch dark was deemed a hallucinogen. As were all of the insurrectional ovoirs romanticizing the disavowed nigger hooligan. The 20th century was just as doomed in its end as it was at its start. Everything but jingoism falls apart. Cowbells and headlamps, please, for all the things that bump for the night. Paracletes for the gloom bird's hated screech. Medicinal religion is a faithless contagion, a burrow deep in the esophagus of a god unable to gargle. This language for flowers, the ritual for a tactile sense of empty. Our contempt is a contiguous hymn, this sacred verdict for what remains fossilized in the human body. We are anthropologists for the anatomy of lies, arsonists who dream ourselves the theme song for landlocked astrology. Our lust for lumens is a sacred art, for there is no NASDAQ for the dark and the damp, no prize money for our sweaty slow. This corona of black skin, we refuse to not let our ghosts be fancy. Sally Hemings, Esquire, Emmett Till, Odalisque. When's the last day you weren't force-fed enlightenment? Our formal attire fit for a sarcophagus, the abstract black sacramentalism, a love so deeply enshrined, its viscera is jarred until deified. We will one day burn the galaxy to the ground, setting the rings of Saturn on fire in effigy to the halos forbidden us. Each tooth a tiny skull, our golden tongues a swollen hull for the songs that give quarter to the divine. Someday all of this will draw to an end, a contending beauty for the eventide, vetting exactly what it reserves, the protagonist, sweet and sable, dissolving into our cogent love. As soft as it is caliginous, its umbras cast in marble.
Thanks, Ron. Thank you so much. And as he said, if you're wanting to order this book from Joseph Beth, don't look for Ron Davis. We may know him as Ron Davis, but we also know Up From Some Dirt, because
Yes.
I know that's your visual artist name as well. So Up From Some Dirt, and if you're wondering how to spell it, it's not how you think. So you definitely need to look in the chat. He's also on Twitter with the same handle, Up From Some Dirt. So thank you, Ron. And next up, we're going to have John James. So welcome, John. Thank you so much for joining us. And where are you coming from today?
I'm coming from Louisville.
From Louisville. And I understand that sometimes you're in Louisville and sometimes you're in California. Is that right?
I'm in Louisville most of the time right now. Yeah, but I'm teaching at UC Berkeley this semester, so I'm zooming back and forth to Pacific time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's two different. You're essentially living in two different time zones at the same time in some aspects. So.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Well, let me tell you all a little bit about John. Is this still true? Do you direct the Creative Writing Academy at Georgetown University in DC?
I do, yeah. It's a summer program. It just wrapped up, actually.
Okay. Since you mentioned Berkeley, I wanted to make sure. Okay, great. So in addition to Berkeley, of course, he's at Georgetown University, not the one in Kentucky, the one in DC, as I mentioned, and he's also the author of The Milk Hours, which you may or may not be reading from tonight. And that was published by Milkweed Editions last year. As we discussed, he splits his time between Louisville and the San Francisco Bay Area. So John, welcome to the series.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Jen. Thanks for having me. And thank you to Ron and Savannah for those really powerful poems. I'm really honored to be reading with you tonight. So I'm going to start with a poem. It's actually the oldest poem in my book, The Milk Hours. It's titled Kentucky September. And I'm realizing now that the book has been out for over a year, that this poem is about 10 years old. But it seemed an appropriate one to kind of kick things off with for this reading. So I'll start with it. Kentucky September. My grandfather stood outside smoking, watching the migrant workers bend over the bare furrow. I was in the cross barn, stripping leaves from green stalks, knowing God was cruel, that he must be. Even on a map, South America looks like a sick heart. I hung the leaves from tiered poles and let them dry in the heat. Once, we found a she-goat dead, her belly split and blood trailing over an arched rock. Something about her innards spread across the ground made me think of nakedness. My grandfather took the carcass in his arms and carried it to the driveway, where I said a short prayer. Stripping finished for the night. I sat next to my grandfather on a wooden bench behind the barn, hands beneath my legs, our backs cocked against a bale of hay. Bats erupted from the silo like buckshot. Then I realized this wasn't my grandfather, and these weren't my hands. All of this was a pasture resembling heaven. Heaven was a meadow in time. The moon rose over the empty fields, wedging shadows together in the dirt. So that poem is sort of tucked away in the last section of the book, but I'm now going to read the opening poem and the title poem to the book, The Milk Hours, which I actually wrote sort of from the vantage of sitting on this porch. So it's difficult to see, but there's a cemetery behind me, and that's the cemetery that is being described in this poem. So this is The Milk Hours. We lived overlooking the walls, overlooking the cemetery. The cemetery is where my father remains. We walked in the garden for what seemed like an hour, but in reality must have been days. Cattail, heartseed, these words mean nothing to me. The room opens up into white and more white, sun outside between steeples. I remember now the milk hours, leaning over my daughter's crib, dropping her 10, 12 pounds into the limp arms of her mother. The suckling sound as I crashed into sleep. My daughter, my father, his son, the wet grass dew speckled above him. His face grows vague and then vaguer. From our porch, I watch snow fall on bare furs. Why does it matter now? What gun? What type? Blue smoke rises. The chopped copses glisten. Snow melt smooths the stone cuts of his name. I was probably ill-advisedly watching part of the Republican National Convention last night, which of course makes you angry when you just think about how out of touch that party is. And, you know, they're giving a speech talking about the Space Force when we're seeing, you know, the largest social uprising, you know, since the 1960s in this country. And, you know, obviously we're living in the midst of a global pandemic of which we're experiencing the effects at this very moment. But of course, there are fires in California, a hurricane happening in the Gulf Coast, and it just feels like things are falling apart. And I have a poem in this book that I wrote just after this last presidential election, really a poem of sort of minor protest, but I thought I would read it all the same. Since a poem in and of itself, I think constitutes an act of minor protest, or can. Poem for the Nation 2016. When it's a weapon, when it flies, the flag is a striped idea flapping on a pole. It makes a fine cape, my daughter says. She wears it on the 4th. I say the pledge, but never know if I mean it or I don't. The alders bleed. The shot trees on the Capitol lawn bend in the wind. Heat collects in the quarried stone of white buildings. This is what an ailing empire looks like, you say. I agree. Watching mallards spin on the Potomac. They paddle on the surface of the reflecting pool, webbed feet beating in assembly, one duck, then another, gathering on the grass before they take flight. In grade school, hands on our hearts, we sang the anthem, words not a one of us understood. The blasting, bombardments, things I'd never heard or seen. In the cut grass, you kiss me. I take your hand to my lips. We watch the flags at half-mast parade around the White Tower. Helicopters hum. Our daughter takes a grape in her hand. You cut it in half. Tell her not to choke. I gulp wine from a cup. Litter in the president's yard. All we ever needed was a start. All right, so I'm going to step away from the book for a second and read part of a new kind of long poem. So I began this piece, and it's maybe not entirely finished. I'm kind of playing around with the end of it. It's written in 4 sort of longish sections. I'm just going to read the first section. But I wrote it last fall when I was in the Bay Area in California. And the year before, we had these horrible fires. You guys probably remember from the news, right? The Camp Fire that killed, I think, more people than had died in any single, wildfire in California before that. And of course, now we're dealing with fires there again. Last year, the fires were actually not so bad. And the reason they were not so bad is because when high winds were happening during the drought season, the Pacific Gas and Electric Company shut off power to basically all of the Bay Area, most of Northern California. And so that universities shut down, public schools shut down, many businesses were shut down. And there was a period, for just several days where people didn't have power, and all you could kind of really do actually was sort of sit and write or walk, or, in some ways that kind of social disruption feels not so different than social distancing, right, during a pandemic. But of course I couldn't have known that at the time. Anyway, so I'm just going to read the first section of this poem that I started writing during that period, and that is sort of about that period as well. It's called The Delusion of Being Absolute. Slicing the bellies of cold cod, I watched tankers plow into the bay's mouth, the bridge's taut cables glinting in shorelight, the thrust of my locution anchored in addiction to place. I scrawled clipped missives, tucked the envelopes in a sack damp with the accretion of fog. I pined for the web's noetic buzz. In the pit I lit a fire, waited while the flame stripped the dry twigs. Sound bled from the sky's fissured maw. I thought of glaciers calving themselves, noise reverberating over a plain of packed snow. Witness was I to its deletion, its mass relaxing like a cube of ice, softening in a tumbler's throat. In those hours, time distended, flies gathered, then dispersed, the water over mottled rocks repeatedly sloshing, each iteration of its movement modeling an attempt to set the record straight. The weather reports will not absolve us. Hills let the wind in. For a moment, the ocean's surface seemed a sheet of slate, the water itself technically expanding, worsening drought, potentiating flame. To me, there was only stasis, a locked to and fro by which the variability of the water's shape heaved a single pulse. The day spread. Tall elk chewed the stems peppering the cliff's ridge. Sun struck. Redness smeared the skin of my neck. I seared the fish flesh, listened to the pop of oil as it singed a thyme sprig. Evening cauterized the grasses, simulated fire with its crude light. My lips moved, and the drone of phonemes drowned the day's heat, a signage no less palatable for its investment in monotony. Once, in the supermarket, I combed the stocked shelves, searching the aisles for evidence of vacancy. I found among the varied cans of meat a cornucopia of choice, an emblem of abundance that formed its own dearth. Out of boredom, I listed the ingredients aloud. Their empty polysyllables rattled in my teeth. All right, I won't inflict the rest of this long poem on you because that's just rude. If it's too long, Ron's poems were perfectly, they were a very good length. I wouldn't want to inflict this like 7-page poem on you, which isn't entirely finished anyways. So the last poem I'm going to read tonight, and I'll close things out, is returns us to Kentucky. And it's also one of the earlier poems from the book. It's titled Years I've Slept Right Through. And it was the title poem to a kind of very early version of this manuscript, really a kind of chapbook version of this manuscript that never, in that formation, never quite saw the light of day. Years I've slept right through. The field is steeped with the violence of horses. Night descends blue hills, and I attempt to weigh distance as a calf tests its footing to the water hole. On the front porch, my cat devours a hummingbird. He beats the brilliant body with his tufted paws. He breaks its wings, swallows whole the intricate bone house. Inside, the pilot light is burning. My sister's friend with the coal eyes is over. Gradually, I crawl into bed, aching for more light. In the dooryard, a young boy stoops to pluck feather from feather until his hands are sore, so prone to sadness, this thief. I take my glasses off and lay them on the table. The shadow of a tree rests inside my palm. This spring, I commemorate my father's death by tacking deer horns above the door. My hammer strokes disperse an assembly of hens waiting around for me to scatter their seed. A mile away, the river is abundant. It breaks its sudden excess on a limestone bridge. A big axled wagon tips into the water where white mud washes the coachman clean. This is a custom he repeats every year, coming and going until his wheels give out, coming to wet his tongue. Dawn chalks over the horizon, rendering the sky a storm-blotched red. The outline of a cow appears on the hill and then dissolves into the fog. I follow her path with my ear, listening as a bell sounds out the trail. It is mine, this world of bread and skin and stone. Lay me in the field with all the fallen horses. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And thank you to Ron and to Savannah, all three of you all, for some wonderful poetry tonight. As of course everyone could hear at home, three very different poets, three very different points of view. And you know, that's part of what this Poetry Powerhouse edition is all about. The Carnegie Center's mission is to empower people to explore and express their voices. And there are so many different voices that need to be heard. I have a couple of questions I thought I'd ask our authors. So if they don't mind to unmute themselves and bring their videos back, we'll take two questions that I've got here. We have some really great ones from our audience. And this first one, it's actually geared toward Ron Davis, but it's a question that I think, you know, John and Savannah might have some interesting answers to, because when we're talking about how different voices can be, also, so how different our influences could be on us as writers. So the question is, and we'll start with Ron, if you could have dinner with three writers, alive or departed, who would they be? What would you have? And who would you have serving your meal?
I would have, it would be Ishmael Reed, Lucille Clifton, and Octavia Butler. I think we'd have fried catfish and brown beans, and it's potluck or buffet style. You know, no one would serve us, so
Very nice. Savannah or John, either one, who's ready? Who's ready?
So I don't know if these are the people, you know, who I would, in all cases at least, be most wanting to read, but I think I'd most like to have dinner with Charles Baudelaire, William Blake, and Allen Ginsberg. And we would probably have oysters and mussels, you know, in some very buttery sauce, and we would be drinking absinthe. Was there a last question?
Who would you have serving your meal?
Yeah, who would be serving the meal? Wordsworth.
Nice. All right, Savannah.
I would probably want to have a meal with Audrey and Rich and Audre Lorde and Mary Oliver. We would probably have two beans and cornbread or chicken and dumplings and green beans, and I would be serving it because I would make it.
I love it. Thank you, Savannah. Okay, well, the next question I'm going to ask is something that I think for, you know, we have a lot of readers and writers in the audience, and I think this is a question that a lot of them have been experiencing themselves. You know, during the pandemic, how has your writing practice and maybe even the writing content changed as a result of the pandemic? And anybody can answer that question who would like to be first. Just
it hasn't changed at all for me, but I haven't written anything new for months. I had spent almost 8 months putting together Defying a Total Darkness. I did the layout and all the typesetting and all that for my publisher, Harry Tankel's books. And that took a lot of time. I have another book coming out in about a month from Broadstone Books here in Kentucky. So I've been doing a lot of editing on that, and hopefully I have another book coming out next year or 2002 maybe. So I'm working on edits for that. So it'll be likely next summer before I'm able to sit down and write new work. And I'm thinking all the time about stuff to write, but I just haven't had the time to do it yet. So I'm jealous of people who are like, oh yeah, I've got like, you know, a chapbook of COVID poems now. And I'm like, you know, damn you, you know, but I don't know. It hasn't changed for me because I just haven't had time to write.
you've got too much going on to slow down, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, I'll take it.
Absolutely. All right, John and Savannah.
I'm writing a novel. I don't know. Well, I think that I've probably had a little more time to write, mostly because a lot of 2019 was full of book events. I did a lot of readings. I taught at a few different places, and so that kept me very busy and took a lot of creative energy. And I've written some poetry, but right now I'm working on a novel, and so that's a little scary, but that's what's happening.
It's a long project, but at least there's a little bit of time to work on it for sure.
Yeah, and fiction intimidates me more than anything, and so we'll see. But I'm pushing through it, so.
Yeah, and I mean, when the pandemic first started, it was a kind of a welcome break because, like Savannah, I'd also been traveling a lot to promote my book, which also came out in 2019, and so I was like, oh, thank God, like, I can breathe for a minute. So I did spend some time, maybe in like April, writing some new poems, and they were really kind of very different poems, even from each other, but also very different from what I had written in the book. But I was casting kind of, I think, a very broad canvas for them, and I wasn't able to really complete either one. And I'm hoping maybe I'll be able to return to them. But sometimes the difficulty when you start imagining a poem that could be 7 or 8 or 9, pages long is sometimes it's hard to get to that tail end of the poem. But then somewhere along the line, like I found pandemic time to be really interesting because it seemed really slow at first, and then while my experience of time seemed like it kind of sped up, like my experience of the stagnancy in the kind of day-to-day worsened, and at that point I was having a hard time writing. And now that the summer is over, I've been so busy with like figuring out how to use Zoom to teach classes like all over the place that I haven't had time to really, sit down and kind of allow that more creative side of myself to come out. But it will when there's a little more room to breathe. This is the first week of school for me, so I've also been just busy with all this kind of beginning of semester craziness.
Well, it's definitely been a roller coaster ride ever since the pandemic began. Hopefully we will not be still doing this next year, but you never know. So our parting question tonight is, where can people go to find out more about you and your writing? And we'll just start with Ron, since he's been our leader on the question.
You can go to my website, upfromsomedirt.com, which I haven't updated since probably last fall. So it needs a lot of updates and changes. I don't think I have any of my books mentioned on it. But typically you can go to my website. I'm on Twitter. I've kind of backed off of Facebook and Instagram a little bit, mostly on Twitter now, but that's where I hang out for the most part.
Okay, Savannah?
I have a website as well. It's savannahsipple.com, and there's information about the book, and there's information about any other readings I'll be doing, and links to anything I've published that's online. And then I'm also on Twitter and Facebook and all of that.
Okay. And John?
Yeah, my website, jj-poetry.com. That's one way to kind of look up poems and that kind of thing, or figure out how to order the book. You can find me on Facebook or follow me on Instagram. I don't do Twitter. I've never been able to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing with it, so I just kind of never really joined the train. But yeah, those two places: Facebook, Instagram, and the website, and I'll be there.
So thank you all so much for your readings tonight, for sharing your words, because poets' words cut very deep. And you not only, reveal something about yourself, but you also reveal something about the reader as well. And us as human beings, a lot of universal themes and a lot of things to think about. So thank you all again. And to our viewing audience, we hope we'll see you next time. We're scheduling the next event. It'll probably be late in September or early October. So to all of you all, good night.